Jean, thank you so much for joining me on The Same Drugs. We've met briefly, but we haven't had a chance to have a deeper conversation. So I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be a part of this. And yes, although it was a very brief encounter, I was very impressed with your thinking and where you're coming from. And I'm excited to have a conversation.
Yeah. I think what you're doing is really brave. I think this is a really difficult conversation for everybody. And I think it's particularly difficult for men to sort of be honest about their histories and truths with the sex industry. And I think that when men like you talk about this stuff really openly, it helps open up the conversation for everyone. But I think that it also sort of empowers and enables men to be really honest with themselves.
Right.
I guess I'm interested to start with you and how you were raised. What was your childhood like? What kind of messaging did you receive around things like sex, relationships, women, men?
Right. Well, I think it's really important to discuss childhood because that's where things get shaped. And when I grew up in a really loving home, my parents were very good parents. They were super involved in the community, and they my mom and dad were pastors, but so I grew up in that framework. Um, but very early in my life, I was molested by a babysitter who was when I was 6, and when I was that was profoundly impactful because it here's this young woman who was saying that she liked me, that I was special, and that I was, handsome, and but that we had to keep this a secret. And so there was a huge um, kind of break in my own soul, if you will, with the confusion of being excited for the fact that someone likes me, someone finds me attractive, they wanted me, and so I felt that felt good, that felt awesome. Slash, I felt dirty, felt soiled, I felt like I was damaged goods, and I didn't tell anybody. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything to anyone because of fear of that, because my body responded to the touch, to the all the sexual stuff as well as the attention. So my body responded in a positive way. And so I'm thinking, wow, this must be, if I liked this bad thing, but I know this is wrong. I know this is not healthy. I know this is not a good thing, but my body responded to it, and so I felt excitement and slash shame at the same time. So shame and pleasure was introduced into my world. My first sexual encounter was that of shame and pleasure, and so I think that's a profound thing because what it did was when you break innocence, innocence is your first experience of something. And how I experienced sex then was that shame was wrapped around it. Um, and that the shame of not being able to talk about it, not being able to say, hey, this happened, because I was afraid that they would see the dirty little boy that I felt I was when that happened, the broken and damaged boy. And yet my fear was that they would blame me because look, my body was receiving it. That it felt good in some ways, um, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't say no, and so there was a lot of confusion in my own soul at a very early age as to how to even cope with what just happened. So that happened for about probably 3 to 4 years with this babysitter, and so nobody had a clue. This babysitter was a friend of the family, and she'd come over, and She would watch us as kids while my parents were doing an event or something, or she would live next door to us, so it was just she'd just walk right over and do that, or we'd stay at her house. And so it was very, it didn't look like anything was going wrong or anything was happening. I never told a soul. And so I kept that secret and buried it big time. And with that, probably at the age of 9, um, there was this older boy that came into our world. His parents were going through a divorce, and he moved into our home. My parents were trying to help him out, and while his parents were going through a divorce, and he was moved into my bedroom, and he was 5, 6 years older than me, and he was like a buddy to me. We rode skateboards together, we did biking together. He beat up my bullies. He was my best friend, but slash he introduced sex into the relationship, and again, my body's responding. It has pleasure connected to it, but slash I felt dirty, I felt broken, I felt damaged, and the I had that happen to me. As long as he stayed in our home, he pretty much did that more times than I can count.
Mm.
And so I didn't say anything to anyone. I kept that secret. And so you can imagine a closet that you stuff all your secrets, and pretty soon the closet's full and it overruns into other areas. And so it was a place where um, I felt so much shame that I didn't feel like I could talk or open up or be real. And this is such an important piece to hear, because for many for many of the men that I help, and men and women, because it's not just a men's issue, is that the thing is that we hold on to our secrets because we think that somehow it will disqualify us from having real relationship. It will disqualify
Mhm.
us because somehow if I share my deepest secrets, in this case it was my wounding. If I share this, you will walk away, you will abandon, you will reject, you will judge me, and it's that fear that keeps me closed off to real relationships.
Right.
So then, because you know, intimacy is not sex. Intimacy is vulnerability, being known, being loved, being embraced. My true need is intimacy. So it's into me see. So that if I am literally afraid to be intimate, if I'm afraid to let someone see me, then I close off that world and I stay empty. And this set the relational pattern for learning how to use people rather than love people. Um, and so a lot of times we misunderstand objectification, and it's been mischaracterized big time for men, because really the issue is that objectification is really based out of my fear of intimacy, my fear of being known.
Yeah.
So I use things rather than love things. I use things rather than connect with things. And because it requires me to be vulnerable, requires me to trust. And I'm not going to do that, because every time I've trusted or every time I've been vulnerable, I was taken advantage of. And so very early in life, not only did I have women take advantage of me, but I also had young men take advantage of me. And so I had a series of more than I can count. I really don't. There's a blurred, there's several memories that come, but it's in a sea of many that I don't have all the details to. Um, and so that wounding was huge in my life. And then on top of that, right in the middle of all of that wounding, I came across a stash of pornography, and
Mm.
uh, and it was my uncle who had this, I don't know, 200 or 300 magazines in his shed. And boy, that was like the same experience. Really, it was shame and pleasure at the same, because I knew there was something wrong with what I was looking at, and I knew that this was not something that it depicted women differently than I had seen women to be. Um, and I knew it was wrong, but there was pleasure connected to it as well. And that pleasure is what caused me to keep coming back to it. And so I would I, all the magazines that my uncle had, I kept going over to his house and consuming and stealing this and tearing pictures out. And eventually I'd gone through everything he had. And then I started going and buying it myself. Many stores would sell it. Back in the day, the only way you can get porn, this will tell you my age a little bit, but back in the day when I could get porn, you had to buy it behind a counter. And you couldn't, there was no access to it. It's not like what the internet's done. Or, so anyhow, so my exposure to porn was profound. And the reason why it was profound is that the toxic ideas and concepts that it brings to the table with the idea of bringing sexual arousal with it. So it eroticizes the dehumanization. It eroticizes and glamorizes the objectification and toxic ideas about how I see women, how I see men, how I see relationships, what does commitment look like? And so the very young age of 12, which was my first exposure to pornography, was like throwing gasoline on a fire. And so I was addicted. I would not have been able to use that language then. I didn't know that, but I couldn't put it down. I kept trying to get away from it because I could see what it was doing to how I was looking at women. I could see that I was all of a sudden now focused on body. I was focused on parts. I was focused on the value of a woman based on what she looked like, not who she was. And that was, incredibly damaging to relationships, because then all the women in my life that I truly valued were women of a certain shape and a certain size and a certain look. And if they didn't fit that scenario, then I certainly was nice to them, but I didn't treat them the same. And I didn't have the same value. The value was based on what she looked like on the outside. And so it taught a lot of toxic ideas, and we can go into that more later if you want to. But the one of the toxic ideas was that the kind of things that they were doing in porn, the kind of things that they were glamorizing and sexualizing, like bondage and torture, and then eventually it was brother sister relationships, mother son relationships, father daughter relationships. And so incest is encouraged strongly. Anything that was considered outside the box of healthy, if you put sex attached to it, now it's somehow okay. And so it was just a box full of toxic ideas, putting in the mind of a 12-year-old who's learning what it means to be a man, what it means to relate with women, what it means to live life in a way that is healthy, what is sexuality about. I mean, it's like fresh clay, in my, so I was definitely open to learn. And the church scenario was is they were not really willing to talk about sex openly. And so there was a lot of unsaid things that actually, which is actually the same thing. It's still shame, because if you can't talk about it, you're creating shame around it. And so that means that you can't put understanding around it. You can't get clarity. You can't get knowledge. Then you're stuck with your thoughts and your ideas and your struggles, and internally trying to figure it all out. And you're not asking for advice. You're not getting any input. You're just living with what you've internalized. And my filters, based on my internalization of sexual abuse, was certainly not healthy. So, I mean, there's a ton more here. I was molested by an older boy who was 19 when I was 12, and I went to a church camp. And the last night of camp, he molested me. So I thought, what do I got, this neon sign on my forehead that
Yeah.
here I am, here I
Yeah.
am, molest me? Because
Yeah.
there was nothing I did to deserve that.
No.
I never even said I wanted it. I think that people that are perpetrating, that are ones who are definitely trying to harm, They see those who are looking or hungry for attention, because that is my weakness there. That was my weakness. I wanted attention. I wanted affirmation. I wanted someone to say that I mattered. And especially as the shame grew in me, it just continually had this internal struggle that I wasn't worth anything, that I'll never amount to anything. Look at my thought life. Look at the way I see women. If I shared that, if I talked about that, it would be the end of me. Because those are perverts, those are scumbags, those are guys that should be thrown away, locked up and thrown away. And so there's no way I'm going to bring things out that I know that would be killing me relationally. And so I bury them. I keep them down. And so uh, it's a downward spiral when you keep the stuff hidden and you don't address it and you don't get help. And I was too afraid. I was scared spitless. But the thing is it only got worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much that you said that is so interesting and so important to talk about. And one of those things was the way that you talk about um, intimacy and objectification, and how like you couldn't really think about approaching women and relationships with women without objectifying them, and throughout kind of without this kind of, I guess, like porn lens, because you were afraid of intimacy, because you
Right.
were afraid, you had all this shame inside that you felt you couldn't share your true self, you couldn't be vulnerable. And so
Right.
instead you created this distance kind of
Right.
through objectification.
Yep.
Like I just wonder how many men are doing that. Like all these guys who are using porn to avoid intimacy, to avoid true connection with their partners, to avoid real relationships with other women that would be like a fulfilling, genuine, trusting relationship where they felt they could be vulnerable. And instead, having these really superficial relationships and sort of, I don't know, pretending as though either that makes them hyper masculine, or that it's
Hmm.
cool, or that it's just like natural. Like that's just how men are, right?
Right. But the thing is that I've been working with men for almost 40 years now. That so the end of this 40 years of, well, 38 years of working with men and doing groups and having women as well come in. The idea of this whole issue of shame, which is that I believe that I'm too damaged to have a relationship, whether it's things that have happened to me or it's a belief that things that I've done. So it's a double whammy. It's things that happen to me I can't talk about, and then the things that I do to cope with the things that have happened to me I can't talk about either. So now I'm really damned, if you will. I'm in a really tough spot. I can't trust anyone with this stuff because it will be the end of me. It's a belief that I can't be real and have a relationship. So then the objectification is really centered in the idea that I have to have a way to control women, and so I can get sex without ever having to reveal my heart,
Yeah.
because that would be the end of me. As long as I can keep a person at a distance, she's going to like me, she's going to care about me, and it's all based on my performance. So as long as I'm performing and doing all the right things, she's going to like me. But if I share anything about my brokenness or my messes, and she saw my thought life, she saw how I, the stuff I've done, it's over. So that is buried in a deep, dark sea. Well, when I bury it, that's part of my heart that I'm, because it's my experiences in life. So my heart gets then put into a closet somewhere. So there's no way my heart's engaged in the relationship. So
Mm.
I have to put walls up to do so. And that's that's at the center of objectification. And for most of the movements out there, they have so demonized objectification. And I get it because it hurts people. I get it. But they don't realize, if we're going to really change this, it isn't going to be us slamming men and calling them evil for the objectifying. We're going to need to
Mhm.
understand what is going on in men, that we're at a large scale buying porn, going to prostitution, trafficking, all of this, the pornography. We're going to this stuff and spending tons of money. Why? Why? What's going on? And it isn't that all men are evil, but I do believe that there is a sea of men who are hurting.
Yeah.
And if we're going to help men, we've got to help them break that barrier and come out and talk about whatever is going on. And when they bring those experiences out in the open and they actually get understanding and support, and actually the number one thing is to be known and to be loved. That's what intimacy is. So if someone hears and knows my struggle and loves me and accepts me anyhow, now I can be real in the relationships and I can bring what is true. And now I have a chance for fulfillment. But when I am using people and I'm never connecting, no matter how much I use, it will never compensate for the lack of connection because I was made for connection.
Yeah, I mean, we all were made for connection, and
Yep.
the way that sex exists for human and the, chemicals produced when we have sex with our partners and with other people, the whole point is to connect us. When we have sex, when we orgasm, it releases oxytocin, and that's like the love hormone, the bonding hormone. It's what
Right.
bonds people together. And for us to see sex instead as, this is the messaging that we get so much nowadays, especially in justifications for things like pornography and buying sex, but also just in terms of, dating culture, so-called hookup culture. Sex can just be about sex. It can just be
Right.
about body parts, and nothing more. But that's not actually how sex works. Sex bonds you with somebody else. It's obviously like, it's a super vulnerable position to be in for both men and for women, particularly for women in certain ways because they're physically more vulnerable. Um, but, I just it's sad that so many people don't realize that, and I think growing up, as a young woman, I spent a lot of time trying to convince myself that sex could be nothing, and it never
Mm.
worked because I would always end up
Right.
getting attached, so I would end up in a relationship with the people that I was just casually sleeping with, or you end up feeling hurt
Right.
or rejected, and you have to create this shell to kind of protect yourself, and I think that if we all sort of knew and understood and accepted that, our bodies are built to connect with the people that we're sleeping with, then I think that we could move forward on that basis in a healthier way.
Well, what's really important, just to add on to what you're saying, Megan, is that the real need, it doesn't, and I'm not lessening sex at all. So sex is a very beautiful gift, and it's so there's nothing bad about sex, healthy sexuality. But what happens is that when we put sex as the driver, in other words, sex is the need, then we miss something big time. And the reality is, sex is designed to be the outflow of intimacy, so that when I am open with someone and they can see my real self and they can see my flaws, my weaknesses, my struggles, my gifts, my strengths, my dreams, my hopes, my distant, my all of that, they can see it all and they still move towards me. They still want me. Wow. When two people do that, the power of that, you want to sell it. It's like, wow, this person knows me, knows all that stuff, even the thought life and all the stuff I've done. They know that about me and they still want me. That
Mhm.
there is a celebration that comes from that. And that celebration is sex. Sex becomes the celebration of intimacy. That sex and intimacy are not the same thing. And that the reason why that's true is because I can have sex with someone, all the clothes off, everything, we do everything, and I still not know that person and they
Yeah.
not know me.
Yeah.
So intimacy and sex are separate. They're not the same thing. However, sex and intimacy together in the right flow, sex becomes more powerful than any orgasm by itself would be, because there's the sense of, wow, this relationship is so powerful. It is, they love me. Man, I've got somebody to walk with, somebody I can be with, and they care. And I don't have to do any hiding. I don't have to do no pretending. I can just be me. And so that the celebration is about connection, and connection creates the healthy sexuality that to celebrate that. So, because what happens in marriage, for instance, I get this a ton. Is the guy comes into marriage and he thinks, okay, I'm married now, so I don't have to worry about I get all the sex I want. And the idea then is that the woman owes that to him. It becomes his idea. This is a need, like I need to eat, like I need to breathe, and like I need to drink water, and like I need to sleep. And so if it's a need and I'm exclusively cutting off all other relationships, my wife owes this.
Yeah.
And so there's an idea that if she doesn't provide that, then she's not meeting my needs, and I have a right, because it's a need, to look outside of the relationship to get it met, which is the biggest fallacy of all. And so that there's this whole thing of that my wife must meet that need, or I can look other places because it's a need. I like breathing air and eating food. And the truth is, no, I don't need that to survive. In fact, one of the key things that the therapist did for me when I entered into counseling and starting to get help, is she said, I want you to go 6 months with no sex with self, no pornography, no sex with your wife. I want you to go 6 months. And I'm going, oh, you got to be junking crazy. Isn't there some kind of buildup that will happen and I'll explode? Or, I mean, isn't it? It's like I had
that
no
can't be healthy.
Yeah. I had no idea that you could actually do that. And so anyhow, I went 6 months and we come back, and the counselor said, I'm really proud of you. You've done really good. I blew it several times. And she says, I think you need to go another 6 months. And I thought, you're junking crazy. And so the bottom line is it totally went out to 18 months of no sex. And the reality is what I learned was that while I was not having sex with my wife, it was back rubs, hand holding, connection, sharing, reading, taking walks together, doing things that built intimacy that were not sex related. And then once sex was entered back in, then it changed the whole dynamic. So that learning how that sex is not the primary way for connection. It's certainly important, but there is the intellect, there's the emotions, and there's the physical, and there is the spiritual, and then there is the sexual. And that it's only a part of the pie. It isn't the whole pie. And so anyhow, pornography says, and the culture says, that sex is the need, and therefore go for it. And it's such a lie. It destroys marriage. It destroys relationships when you have that thinking, because it's entitlement. It says you owe it to me, and no person's going to feel great about feeling like they owe something, right?
No, I mean, that's not a way to, if your partner, like your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, isn't sleeping with you, the way to encourage that isn't by telling them you owe me, or else I have the right to go elsewhere, or like, well, like then I guess I have to use porn because it's like that's
right.
breaking the trust, that's breaking the intimacy, and then that person's gonna feel far less inclined to. I mean, and like it seems like it's such a big thing to address. It seems like such a big project, because the messaging from the porn industry and from pornography advocates and from, third wave feminism, which is sort of, much of my history has been in criticizing third wave feminist ideology, because it has normalized the sex trade. It has normalized prostitution. That's that mantra, sex work is work. As though, we need to just think of this as a neutral thing. It's just a job like any other. And then you say, sex isn't a job. And they're like, well, it can be, like the fact that people don't understand why sex shouldn't be work, and why, and and it's not, I'm not saying it has to be intimate. I'm never going to tell somebody, sex should only be within a marriage. I'm not married, and I don't plan to get married. I'm not a religious person. I'm not a conservative person. Right. But like, it's just, it's such a hard thing to confront. And the messaging is that men are entitled to pornography and that men are entitled to prostitution even. You know, the amount of times that people have told me or that I've seen people say or heard people say that, you know, if a man's in, you know, a sexless marriage, a sexless relationship, what else is he supposed to do? You know, a porn is like a healthy outlet because then he can protect his relationship because then he's not cheating. Even that seeing a prostitute is a healthy outlet because then he's not cheating. As if both of those things don't. I think both of those things count as cheating. But I want to get back a bit more to your story and your experience, which we learned a bit. I learned a bit about through this film that you participated in, called Buying Her. So tell me a bit about how, you know, you had this, I guess we could call it an unhealthy relationship with sex and with women, and then you were using pornography. How did that become buying sex?
Well, when the idea that buying sex keeps it safe and I get what I want without having to ask for it or be vulnerable, it's just a transaction. This is what I want you to do, and here's the money what's it going to cost me, and I pay it, and it's safe, it's simple, and in my mind, I'm not saying it is, but it's in my mind, it's not hurting anybody. She's making money, and I'm getting what I want, and it's done. It's over. So that's the thinking, but the truth is that it's far greater damage than I realize, and not only to me, but to her. And for one thing, money, um, no woman's for sale. She's not a commodity. She's not a piece of meat. She's not something to market. She's a human being. And whenever we commodify or we monetize women, we're stripping them of their dignity, which means their value, their worth, their soul. I mean, I don't. When I was using, I didn't think about what her dreams were. Or I didn't think about where she going in life, and where she's struggling, or what makes her cry, what makes her laugh. I didn't know any of that. All I cared about was, you're doing this. I don't care what it cost you emotionally, or we just don't do it. I'm not going to pay you. But the idea was it was centered around money. And so that it didn't matter what the cost was to her. All it mattered was about the money. And so I think that as I grew in this, there was a lot of, there's a big chasm between, um, between what my wife was wanting to do and what I was getting in the porn and the prostitution and all that. And so simply I'm thinking, see, my wife is being, you know, frigid, but, you know, she's not. And so therefore I got no choice. And that was my thinking. But the reality is, and in helping, learning later, and we won't get into that too much right this moment, but the idea that what I needed was to deal with the things that are blocking my ability to connect with her. Because if I could have done that, and then we would have been on the path to change and grow. But because every man in her world had used her before she met me, and she had a series of rape and of sexual abuse and all other things you could go along with, that the I was just another man reinforcing all that she couldn't trust. No woman's going to bring that vulnerability to someone she don't trust.
Yeah.
And so basically, when I stepped out, even though she didn't know I was going to prostitutes, she didn't know I was going to pornography. She didn't know that at all on the front side. She didn't know that till I got arrested. So the idea then is that, but she could see that I wasn't connecting to her, that I wasn't connecting with her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the more isolated she was, well, why would she want to be vulnerable to that? And
Mhm.
so, well, the pathway to healing is to learn, how to first of all connect with yourself, and then how do you allow others in and connect with them, and to know them. So, and you move away from objectification. So objectification meaning that all I saw women as pieces of meat. Now I get to learn about what drives them, what their dreams are, what their heart is, what hurts them, and continue to go deeper and care about the person. And so, the objectification is what causes, excuse me, the lack of intimacy is what sets up the use. Uh, and so, with that in mind, I also had a lot of wounding from sexual abuse. I mean, anger, um, rage, and
Mhm, mhm.
I was a very angry man, a very angry guy, and I didn't understand where the anger was coming from, but it was from being raped as a boy,
Yeah.
both from female and men. So I had a lot of anger towards women, and when I was consuming porn that was continually reinforcing rape. Um, that where I'd watch a movie that was watching where a woman was being raped. I mean, it's like you're being a spectator and you're getting to watch what you would never do, supposedly. And so it just kept glamorizing and making it more arousing and more exciting to where I began to have rape fantasies. And there started the sexualized rage, the sexualized anger, the unresolved wounding that I carried as a man. And so rape is very much sexualized anger, and combined with all the other things we've just heard that I've just shared. And so it came to a head where, I was, doing rape fantasies and wondering when someday how I would do it. And I'd cross a line and I would follow somebody, and then then I would say, "What am I doing?" Snap out of it, and I go back to normal world for a little while, and then I'd find myself going back into the fantasy side of it again and again. And this began to get stronger and stronger until one day I crossed that line. And that crossing that line just seemed like a fantasy at the moment because there's not a real person sitting there when that happened in my mind until I saw her when I forced my way into the car, and the fear in her eyes just like slapped me across the face and said, "Oh, wake up. This is a human being you're talking about here. What are you doing?" And that crash right there was significant for me because I would never want to hurt another human. I know this is going to sound really weird, and I'm sorry if it doesn't sound well, but I would never hurt another human being on purpose. But when the women are objectified, she's not human, and that is so dangerous to get to the place where you don't see women as a human being. Now, you would have come and talked to me and said, "Are women human?" And you say, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." I would. In my mind, I know that, but in the fantasy world and in the what I was consuming for a sexual appetite was to use women at whatever expense, and because all it mattered was what I wanted and what I needed, and the rage and the anger inside was is that the feeling like if I could never open up, I could never be real. This woman wouldn't want to be in my life, and yet I'm attracted to her. And so the rage and the anger of the wounding that was there and all of that combined just kind of materialized. And there's no excuse. I have full choice to do what I did, and there is no way to blame an addiction or to blame pornography here, to blame my sexual abuse. It's my reactions to those things that caused this to happen. I could have gotten help at any point. I could have stepped out and got help, but I did not. And I carried this to the level that I did. And it took that for me to wake up. And unfortunately, that breaks my heart to think that I hurt an individual, even though I got out of the car and didn't do any more than that. It
Yeah.
still was enough. It still was enough. It still
Yeah, it would
scared the
be
hell.
terrifying.
No, it scared the hell out of her. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
literally, I mean, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse in that, none at all. But there are things that clearly were a part of my recovery that I needed that made it clear to me where I was messing up and where the struggles were and what I needed to change. So um, I was very, 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 very disappointed in recovery for the first several years because um, the recovery was you get into a group and you sit in around a group and you sit there and when it comes to your turn, you share your bottom lines. In other words, what you're doing, what your struggles are, and you say, I am, in this case, I'm a sex offender or I'm a sex addict. And the reality of that, the truth is that those guys, many of them stay in that circle for 14, 15, 16, 20, 30 years, and they're still sharing the same bottom lines. They're still sharing the same struggles, and they're going nowhere. So when I sat in my first group, and the guy who's been leading the group, who was 14 years in recovery, shared his bottom lines, and they were the exact same bottom lines as mine. And I'm going, is that what I'm going to look like in 14 years doing this? I'm going, hell no. And so I knew that I needed to do something different, and it wasn't going to, but it was hard to find things that could help because everything is centered around behavior rather than dealing with the roots. What is at the heart of this? What drives this problem so that we stop it rather than just pruning the tree, stopping
Mm-hmm.
the branches, cutting off the branches. Because, I can surely stop viewing pornography, but it's going to come back again and again and again and again and again because the roots still
Yeah.
sit there. So
Yeah.
anyhow, I don't want to wander off. I know you want to.
Well, yeah, and I mean it's something that I've tried to be openly critical about in terms of, the response and approach to men who use pornography and to men who chain or pay for sex. Um, I don't wanna only target this group, but from radical feminists, this was, what I was talking about in part, and I mean, I'm sure this kind of response comes from other people as well, but what I had tried to say was, it doesn't work to just turn all these men into villains because, well, for one, like, I know men in my life who use pornography and they're not villains, and I
Right.
have conversations with them about pornography, and, I think it takes some time to change your mind about things, especially when it's something you've been doing for a long time and that you've been told is fine and that you've been telling yourself is fine, it takes a while to adjust and make change. Um, I mean, like, there are bad men in the world. There are men
Of
in the
course.
world who, like, are sociopaths and psychopaths and who are bad men who need to be locked away, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And
Yep.
there's other men who come from backgrounds like you and that I feel like have pushed all of this stuff so far out of their minds that they don't even wanna think about it, never mind talk about it, never mind think about why they're doing these things, why they might have an addictive relationship to these things, why they behave in ways that are hurtful to women that I think really fundamentally hurt themselves also in terms of their ability to connect and build relationships and feel vulnerable and feel like they can be themselves and become good men that they respect, to have self-respect. Like, I don't know how much a person a man can feel self-respect when he's engaging in these activities unless, again, he's like some kind of sociopath, right? I guess I wanted to mention because I just remembered this as you were talking that, this woman, Dr. Deborah So, she's like a sex researcher. She tweeted, "Porn doesn't create unusual sexual preferences. It merely reflects what the individual was already into." And I had responded and said, "That doesn't parse with what both men and women say about how porn use affected their sex life, arousal, sexual desires, things women and girls say men wanted to try out on them, etc." But, like, it doesn't sound to me like you started out with a sexual desire or a rape fantasy. It sounds like that was something that developed in you.
Yep. That's correct. And the kind of material that where I was consuming was encouraging those activities. And the thing is that I want you to, if I could just kind of think about porn as a sack of seeds, thoughts, ideas that are toxic, that are unhealthy, and you plant those seeds, and then they will produce the same kind of behavior as the kind of seed that they are. And so the idea that you get what you plant, and so porn is a sack of seeds, toxic ideas about sexuality, about who women are. And so if we believe that good school and education and good books help people grow and become a good professional, then you have to know that the opposite is true as well. And that a good book produces healthy in someone, leads them the right direction, plants ideas in their head that will grow, help them grow and move towards, to put that passion towards something of value. When you have the just the opposite to be true, especially for the, keep in mind kids. Every man that I have worked with, every woman that I've worked with, that have done sexual stuff, that have messed up, has always started in early childhood. And
Mm.
so that's in the formative ages of 9, 7, 10, 12. Mine was 12, but that is, it's become a lot more prevalent in the younger years now because of the culture we live in. It's not just going to a pornography site, it's not just going to a magazine or watching a video. The culture we live in, it's sexualized culture. You can't live life in this culture and not be exposed to pornographic images. And so the idea then is that sex charged images are shaping the appetite of our young children, and that is very real. And so the idea that somehow this isn't the material's fault, then why are we even doing education? Why do we give people books to read? I mean, it's crazy. That's stupid thinking. Um,
Right.
so anyhow, you know that already. I'm preaching to the choir. Um, but um, I think I think for me it does, there is a part of my ownership in it is that, yeah, there's wounding inside of me or hurts inside of me that was vulnerable to those seeds. And if you think about it, if you break the ground and you dig a hole, then that seed can be fertile and can grow. But if you put the seed on hard ground, then it won't go anywhere. So the abuse opens the hole. Abuse opens the soul. It opens up the heart to be more vulnerable to toxic ideas because that's how we see ourselves. We don't see ourselves in a healthy light based on the damage done. And it seems like that's the only thing we can do to get love or to get acceptance. It's my only path to get what I want without ever being vulnerable, without ever having to risk. Um, so,
Hmm.
but
I want to know how you first started paying for sex. You know, how did this move from um using pornography? I mean, you were in a relationship, I think. Were you in a relationship at the time? Were you married
yep,
then?
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And
Hmm.
so what happened? Did something like snap where you're like, oh, maybe I'll start to, you hadn't done it before. Why did you decide to take that step?
Um, so the our marriage was basically sexless. We would have sex every once in a while. And my idea when we did have sex, she would hide in the closet to undress. She would turn off the lights, and we could only have sex under the blanket, so you couldn't see. So there was a lot of shame centered around our whole sexual experience, so there was a lot of that going on. And but the pornography that I was consuming was encouraging this to, and there was articles written along with some of that stuff about how prostitution is, empowering women. They can, the money and all that garbage that we all know we're fighting now. And at the time, I'm vulnerable, I'm struggling, I'm trying to find a way to work through this without ever having to open up. Because if we were really going to have to work through this, we'd have to go to counseling and actually dig in and work, and I would have to reveal my own stuff. And I didn't want to do that. And so the one time that I'm in Hollywood, and I'm driving down Hollywood Boulevard. And back in the day, Hollywood Boulevard was lined with prostitution, and there was also a lot of massage parlors back in those days that were, and they're still around, but but we're full of that as well. So my first encounter of the prostitution was this woman, and when I came to a stoplight, she literally approached my car. And so I would have never, probably never breached that line. Um, I always kept it in the fantasy world, always kept it in the porn world, and here's the opportunity to actually do it. And so when I did that, the shame that I felt, I was angry, I was disgusted at what I did, but also at the same time, that's what happened with porn. That's what happened. I would consume it, I'd be upset, I felt shame about it, and I swear I'd never do it again. And then I went back and did it again, um, and then I went into this massage parlor, which the woman offered more than the massage, and I didn't know that was even there at the time. And so once I started down that path, it was like taking heroin for the first shot, and then it just keeps going. Um, and so my first encounter was just happen chance, so to speak. I was driving down Hollywood Boulevard, and that woman approached my car. But by no means was it her fault. Yeah, I could have said no. I could have offered her money to help her if she needed money, but no, I didn't do that. I took advantage of somebody else's dilemma. Um,
And
so
how did you feel after that encounter?
disgusted, angry, upset, was not at her, at me. Self-loathing. How could I do that? How could I take this to another low? I committed to marriage. I wanted to work through it. I didn't want to have anything to destroy the relation. I knew that this would be a destroyer of a relationship, and how could I do such a thing? Um, but none of it was concerned about her, the woman that I just purchased, so to speak. I didn't have any concern about her at all. I didn't even think that direction. It was all about getting caught, how it impact my marriage, the self-loathing that I stooped low enough to pay a prostitute, a woman who prostituted herself. She's so I felt like um, that first encounter took me down a path of continuing, because there's one side of me was is that the woman who prostituted herself, she did things that my wife would never consider. And so in one way, there was this side like, wow, okay, then this is what and the lie that I believed in that was is that this is what my wife should be doing. And truth is when I look back on it, no, that's not true at all. There's, a woman has a right to choose what level she wants to be involved. And I was looking through the lens of porn, what porn says women can do or should do, and the idea that, but I won't get graphic and I won't get into any kind of what happened, but the idea that any sane woman would not do, and yet porn was saying that that's normal. And what I was asking of her was quote unquote normal, but what it wasn't. So the dilemma was I was looking and relating with my wife through the lens of porn.
Well, and the other aspect of that is that, the what those women and girls are doing in porn and prostitution, they're not enjoying. So essentially, men are expecting their wives and their partners, if they're expecting them to match these behaviors, these performances, these sex acts, and so on and so forth. What they're wanting their partner to do is something that they don't want to do, that they don't enjoy. There's a lie
Right,
that I think men tell
right,
themselves, although I don't know if they believe it or not, that those women in prostitution maybe are enjoying it, or that those girls in porn just really like sex, or they really like gangbangs, or they're really kinky, or whatever
right.
you want to call it. I still am not entirely convinced that when men say that or tell themselves that they actually believe that. Did you?
I think you rationalized. I think I rationalized it away. I think if you would have stopped and thought about it and talked it through, I would have had to say this is not helpful to her. Um, but I think the idea that at the time my rationale was that she didn't show any kind of disdain, or she was kind, she was nice, she was accommodating, There was nothing that indicated that she was like she was going against her will. And but all that was about, obviously is the thing of, uh, she was definitely doing this because of her own wounding, and she had learned how to do it and get through it and survive. And so now I know that, and now knowing that, I could never do it again. I could never go back and pay for any of it. It would, you'd have to shoot me first. There's no way I would be able to. No way I would do that. But then I saw it. The rationale was that she was. Now, whether I really believed it underneath, I don't think so. Probably
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
But that's what I told myself. That's what I told myself
And how long did you continue to pay for sex after that
for
first time?
7 years, 8 years.
Wow. And did the experience change? Did how you thought about the women change? Was there at any point when you did start to think about, how the person on the other end of this encounter felt? Or did you ever think about, is she being trafficked? Is she being forced? Is there something bad going on in her life? How does she feel about having to do all this?
There's only there. I would say that there the there was only a couple times where I began to question things when I was going into massage parlors, because the women in this massage parlors were only there for a few months, and then they were gone. They were and so they had a new face, and they were constantly moving and flexing, and I couldn't figure out why that was true, because you find that person that that you feel like, that this is the perfect one for you, and they are good, they're accommodating and all that, and then she's gone, and nobody had an explanation for why. But it wasn't just one. It happened. Just keep in mind, I was a dedicated consumer for many years, and so I knew, quote unquote, knew the women. No, just knew their name. um, but they would leave and couldn't figure out, well, what's that's kind of weird. um, that they now, after I learned that they were being trafficked, is the way I would say it. And so that was a heartbreaker. When in my redemption side, if you want to use that language, or my healing side, my changing side, I began to learn the reality of that world, and the more I learned, the more grief it brought me, and the more pain that to know that I participated in destruction of another human being. Um, and It's going to sound weird, but I think that the way that I got there was that, um, when my daughter, I won't go into too much detail with her story, but it was, my daughter was date raped, and when she was date raped, by a guy who was about 9 years older than her, and she got out on this date without my permission. And anyhow, long story short, I was so mad that someone had taken advantage of my daughter, and she's special, she's everything to me, and how could someone be so, um, callous and so mean. And I was just enraged, and then it came to me as I thought, I was going, hmm, there are other daughters just like her, and every parent has a daughter. Every one of those women have parents, and they have a name. They're human beings. And what gives you the right to use their daughters as you've been using? And it was like, oh, just an epiphany. It's an awakening happened there. The reality that this was someone's daughter. This was a human being. She had a name. She had dreams. And boy, that was a huge shift for me. And I started seeing that through that lens, and it profoundly over time changed the way I looked at it. It humanized it. The way we changed objectification is bringing humanity back. You got to you got to have a story to it. You got to have a human there. You got to help you see that this is hurting people, not this isn't a choice. This is an empowerment. This isn't helping women. This is hurting women. And this, what it did is it helped hit me as a father. So how I I mean, the anger that I felt towards someone who hurt my daughter, well, I'm doing the same thing to other daughters.
Mhm.
What just, it just woke me up.
And but that did that happen before the arrest?
Nope,
Oh, that was
that was
after.
him
So
after
was
the
what
fact.
happened was the arrest kind of a major turning point for you in terms of your behavior and how you thought about all of this?
Yeah, when I got arrested, I mean, my whole story came out in front of everybody, and and going to jail and going through the court system and losing pretty much every relationship that I had based on that. There's a ton of garbage that happened there, but for me, that was a necessary shift because it was, this was not just some kind of I'm just looking for outside pleasure. This was destructive and harmful, and bringing it into the open showed how destructive and how harmful. And no, that was it for me. That's what it took. I had people in prison tell me that, well, we'll see you back. You always come. No, you'll come back. And I go, no, this is all it took for me. I'm done.
And was that were you married to the same woman that you're married to now?
No,
This is
no,
a different marriage, yeah. So your wife
totally.
left you, I presume.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I lost that marriage. 27 years of marriage, and she didn't leave immediately. We tried to work on it and tried to make it happen, but she never could. Um, she was anorexic and then would go to bulimic, and then she was self mutilating, and so she was in and out of the hospital, and she um, went to a 6 month uh, ranch where they worked on her eating disorder and a 2 month recovery, kind of a aftercare. And then she came back and she was back in it again as soon as she got home. So the damage done to her was huge. It revealed her own rape stuff as well, but it also revealed just the body shame that, where most women that are in married to or in relationship with a guy that's consuming porn looks at herself through the lens of what he looks at and says, I'm not enough, I don't measure up, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not sexy enough, I don't have the breast, I don't have the butt, I don't have this, I don't have that. And so it's body shame big time. And so we see a lot of self damage done to women who overeat or don't eat, either way. Both of those are driven from the same shame. Um, Body enhancements, breast surgeries and liposuction and all that to try to correct what they feel like they're not, because of what their husband's looking at. Um, and the idea is, if I'm enough, why is my husband or why is my boyfriend, why is my partner looking there at her if I'm enough? And so it creates a great deal of damage to the woman, especially living in that environment over and over and over again.
Mhm. And how did you start doing the work that you're doing now with men?
Well, um, I think the thing was that, um, I told myself that I was going to get help. And then when I got help, when I figured it out, that I was going to help others because I know what it's like to be in the situation I was in, and had begun to see there are a ton of other men. When my story came out in the open, there's a ton of people around me that had the same story, maybe not quite as deep or struggle, but they started coming forward and saying, "What are you doing to get help?" And I realized that there's just a ton of men who don't know how to deal with this, how to face this, and all of the current information out there is just fluff. It doesn't really help, and so I made a commitment early in my journey that as I get help, I'm going to help others, and so which ended up me developing my own systems, my own stuff, to help people get out. And because I know what it took for me, that I bring that to the table for others. And we've done retreats and conferences and workshops and mentoring and counseling, um, training professionals, um, on how to approach shame and how you help people deal with shame. and how do you deal with sexual brokenness and sexual addiction. Um, so we just approach it totally different. This whole thing is relational health, and if we can solve that, helping people learn how to connect in a real way, in a meaningful way, it changes the dynamics of everything. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad to hear that you're doing that work. I wish that there was more available, to help men who are in these kinds of situations and maybe feel like they can't talk about it or there's nowhere to
right.
go. What would you say to a man who's struggling with any of these things, whether that's the, early childhood sexual abuse, the porn stuff, paying for sex,
Well, the number one thing for me is to say that you're not your messes, you're not your mistakes, and that you're better than this. You're meant for more, and that we can get through this. This is certainly a flaw. Certainly, it's certainly not good, and you're certainly hurting other people, including yourself. But it's not the end of your story. You can change this. This is not who you are, and to have the courage to take that first step, find a safe environment to talk and to get this out, and to risk, but risk in a way that you're going to someone who knows what the heck they're doing.
yeah.
So find it, right?
I think that's a hard thing because I know that there's a lot of therapists nowadays who I think don't see things like pornography and prostitution as a problem. So one of the things I worry about is that, we're saying to men, get help, talk to somebody, but then I think they could end up talking to the wrong person, you know what I mean?
Oh, totally. I mean, the first counselor that I saw was court appointed, and the
Mm.
counselor told me that I didn't. That the real problem was is that I wasn't watching enough pornography in the open.
Mm.
That I was doing it in secret, and that was the problem. And that if I would just do it in the open, it would just be fine. That was my first counselor,
Right.
and I'm going. I have to do this because the court's saying I have to. But as soon as this guy is out of my life, I'll jump through his hoops. But I didn't get any help from him. Um, so he was a disaster. In fact, I think he had the same problem. He just was trying to help people who were in the same mess he is. Um, so it is important to find competent help, and I think the biggest thing is finding a place where they deal with root issues, and it isn't behavioral mod. It isn't just dealing with, well, you stop porn by, okay, you put blocks on your computer, you you have accountability where basically all these relationships you're like a little kid, and you gotta keep have this accountability, and the idea of accountability is good, but it's not in the same vein that they're talking about. So it's having a good, safe environment for you to talk, but you also need a good counselor, somebody who's been there. And what I'm going to say is been there and done that. You're not going to get this in school. Sorry. But and I'm not trying to down any counselors that are out there that have been through their degrees. But for many of them, if they haven't been there and they haven't gone through it, it's hard for them to really truly help. Um, they're just kind of given information from a distance. And but anybody that's walked through addiction and has actually gotten to the other side has the ability to help, because all addictions are the same underneath it all. The roots of it are all based on dysfunctional family hurts that we carry. Um, whether it's a drug or alcohol, whether that's gambling, whether that's a food addiction, it's all the same. Porn is a little more intense because it's sexual, and we're sexual beings, and it changes it in the dynamics a little bit. And so it does need to have some experts in terms of how do you get out of the lifestyle of fantasizing, when you can't stop thinking about rape, or you can't stop thinking about how you're going to use this woman or do this or do that. How do you get out of that world of wondering when you're going to get your next fix in pornography? So there's a whole lot that has to be discussed about how we break those cycles. But um, but other than that, it's the same as any addiction.
And finally, the film I mentioned earlier, the documentary that you
Mm-hmm.
participated in, is Buying Her. Are there still showings? Where can people see it?
They're finishing up their last tour in the world tour, so it's done. It's done being shown right now in tours, but they're gonna. I don't know how they're gonna. They did all the tours to kind of get some, feedback as to how people was impacted by the film. Now they're going to turn around and look for a vehicle, like whether that be Netflix or whether that be some other way, um, to carry the film so that people can see it. We'll probably have another one at the end of August in Anchorage, and there might be a couple small ones, but none of them are planned at this moment. So I can't answer that one decisively.
Is there a way that people can connect with you or find your work
Sure,
anywhere?
sure. My webpage is authenticrelationshipsint.com, and it's there that people can see um, what the work that we do. Right now, we're currently in the middle of changing the websites and moving things around. So the shift would mean that I don't have my retreats up or my workshops up at this moment, but everything else is there. So videos and things that I've done in the past, you name it.
Great.
They're all. That's
I'll post those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk further. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I really appreciate your openness and vulnerability around all of this. I'm sure it feels scary even now because of judgment and things like that. But I think and I hope that it helps a lot of men.
Well, Megan, I just want to say to you that I appreciate the heart that you have, and uh, just the fact that you're not afraid to take on harder issues. And it seems like controversy is not scary to you. You seem to take it on with courage, and got some spirit there, and I like that. I love that, and so thank you for being willing to do so and take it on. And it is such an important topic, and I appreciate you being out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.